Well, good morning, everybody. The Albanese Labor government welcomes this interim report from the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, and we are committed to a better future for our serving personnel, veterans and families. We will now look into implementing these recommendations that have been made. Unfortunately, the rate of veteran suicide in Australia is a national tragedy, and it is a rate that is significantly higher than across the general Australian population. It is devastating that Australia has lost more serving and former serving personnel to suicide than it has lost through operations over the last 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's why we strongly supported calls by the family members of those that had taken their lives for the establishment of a Royal Commission looking into defence and veteran suicide, something that the previous government resisted for some time. We recognise the importance and the significance of this report. In the interests of transparency, we have chosen to not sit on this report, but rather to release it at the first available opportunity today, so that everybody can see what the Royal Commission says now needs to be done. And as such, we as a government are only just seeing these recommendations today, now for the first time as well. This report will be confronting reading for members of our Defence Force, veterans and families. No doubt, some of these recommendations will be easier and quicker to implement than others. Having just received the Royal Commission's interim recommendations today, we will be reviewing these recommendations closely and provide a formal government response to each of those recommendations as soon as we are able. It is clear that a number of the recommendations from this interim report call on the government to get on with recommendations that have been the subject of numerous previous reviews into this area. It is vital that these are now addressed as a priority. I'm also happy to say that some of the matters raised in the Royal Commission's interim report are already being addressed by the Department of Defence and the Department of Veterans Affairs, such as increasing the staffing and resources available to the Department of Veterans Affairs to reduce the current claims backlog. This is something that we committed to doing at the election, and as a new government we are delivering the 500 additional staff to the Department of Veterans Affairs so that we can get through that backlog as soon as possible. Further, we are aware of references in the report to concerns regarding flow of information from agencies to the Royal Commission. The Deputy Prime Minister, the Assistant Minister and I met with the Chief of Defence Force, the Secretary of Defence and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs a few weeks ago to make clear that under this new government, the Royal Commission must be assisted in any way possible to ensure that it can make the most effective recommendations on how to address the scourge of suicide that has plagued our defence personnel, veterans and families. And this was completely accepted. The Albanese government supports the Royal Commission in carrying out its important work to further understand the complex issue of suicide and how we can better reduce the risk for serving and ex-serving members of our Defence Force. All people who put on a uniform and sign up to serve our nation know that they do that, they may make the ultimate sacrifice, leaving their family behind, and they deserve the best support while serving and after they transition to civilian life. This is particularly the case when individuals encounter mental and physical injury. This is a commitment that we owe our defence personnel, veterans and families. We will now consider these recommendations from the Royal Commission in detail and provide a formal government response shortly so that we can get on with the task of saving lives and ensuring a better future for our defence and veteran communities. Can I also just reiterate that I know the tabling of this report and its content will be confronting to some, especially in our defence and veteran communities. And so can I just say that support is always available through serving ADF members and families, an all-hours support line, which is on 1800 628 036. There's also Open Arms Veterans and Families Counselling on 1800 011 046. And Lifeline Australia on 13 11 14. And of course, if a life is in danger, call 000. Happy to take any questions.
looking at the things that the Royal Commission has listed as recommendations for immediate action that are in the purview of the government. The first recommendation is about simplifying and harmonising the veteran compensation and rehabilitation legislation. The Productivity Commission's already looked at all of this. Have you started to already examine these recommendations, and is there any work already underway on that?
It's certainly something that I'm very well aware that the Productivity Commission had recommended. It's also something that many ex-service organisations and veterans organisations have spoken to me and the government about, and critically the complexity that is embedded in doing a process like that. And so we have not formed a way forward on that. We knew that this would be the subject of some recommendation in the nature of the questions and the issues that were being raised in the hearings in the lead up to this interim report. As you can see now, recommendation 1 of the Royal Commission does provide some detail about how they think that be approached, and certainly this is something that I want to be diving into, how we best approach that in as timely a way as possible, but in a way that puts veterans first.
Minister, do you believe that the government owes an apology to current ADF members and the families of veterans who have committed suicide, given that the report has identified a lack of government support and responses over the years? Do you believe that that apology should be carried out?
I think certainly it is the case that we've seen from the statistics, as I mentioned, there is a materially higher rate of suicide amongst the veteran population than we see across the general Australian population. Something's been going wrong there. And that's why we were so supportive of the calling of a Royal Commission like this, so that we can find answers and so that we can find out what needs to be done. If there have been failings in the way in which Defence has operated and failings in the way in which the Department of Veterans Affairs has operated, I'm deeply sorry about that. That is not what these agencies are set up to do. The Department of Veterans Affairs, which I'm directly responsible for, is an agency that's there to support veterans. And if it hasn't been doing its job, as a government, we're sorry about that. It's why we wanted a Royal Commission, so we can find out what we can do better. So absolutely, to people that have felt that they have not got the treatment that they deserve, I apologise for that. It wasn't under our watch, but as a government of this country, veterans always deserve the best, and we should be delivering that for them.
When do you expect the claims backlog will be cleared? And also, 3 young ADF members have died by suicide in just the past 3 months. Are we still failing our servicemen and women?
I can't comment on the specifics of those cases that you refer to, but my condolences go out to their families, friends and colleagues, because every life is precious and every taking of one's life is a complete tragedy. In terms of working through the backlog with Veterans Affairs, it's something that I'm working closely with the department on as we engage the additional staff, implement other recommendations from the McKinsey report, which the previous government tried to keep secret. I don't have a time frame by when we will be able to get through that backlog as yet, but getting greater clarity on that is something that I'm really committed to getting at the moment.
The Commission recommends that the backlog's cleared by 31st of March 2024. That's still a really long time away. Are you worried that more veterans will slip through the cracks between now and then?
Certainly, I would like to see the backlog cleared as soon as possible. I note that that date's there, and I've only seen that date literally 15 minutes before walking into this room. So I would like to see the backlog cleared as soon as possible. It is important to recognise, though, that for veterans that are making claims through DVA, they do have access to income support upon making those claims, and they do have access to medical support for conditions that are of the nature that we know are nearly always found to be related to Defence Service, so that they can start accessing those supports and rehabilitations as soon as possible, while still waiting for formalisation of their claims.
Minister, it does say in the report, it's not a formal recommendation, but it says there's a compelling case for an entity with comprehensive oversight of the implementation of recommendations, and that's similar to something that Bernadette Boss said in her report. I appreciate you haven't had the report for very long, but what's your disposition on that kind of ongoing body?
Certainly I want to get into the detail of what the Royal Commission has recommended and the basis of why it's recommending that. But I think the underlying point that the Royal Commission is getting to, that we've now had decades of reviews and recommendations after recommendations that are the same sets of recommendations not being implemented for some time, is a matter of some concern, and making sure that we get on with that task is very important. Sarah.
If I can ask about the DBA, do you think that there will be a case for funding that, or giving it more funding so that we are getting through those backlogs? And do you concede that might be challenging given the current budget position?
Certainly funding for any government work at the moment is difficult in the current budget climate, but we have already made the commitment to provide those 500 additional staff and resources to the Department of Veterans Affairs. That will be obviously part of the budget as it picks up all of our election commitments going forward. We're providing, those resources will be provided. We are in the process of employing additional staff there now to get through this backlog.
On those 500, so the backlog is about 42,000 applications. To what extent, why 500? Do you expect you may have to bring on more staff to deal with that? How many do you think, many more of the applications do you think that 500 additional staff is actually going to be able to process? And if I can, just on a second thing, you said that the ADF have accepted that they must assist the Royal Commission in any way, but in the report it says that in the opinion of the Royal Commission they have been constrained, quote, unreasonably from asking the hard questions of government, and many of the recommendations relate to putting in legislation or making changes to allow them to access information and ask those hard questions. What are you committed to introducing that legislation as soon as possible so that the ongoing Royal Commission can ask those questions rather than rely on, a promise from the ADF that they will assist?
To the first question, at this stage I believe the 500 are sufficient, and that's why we made that commitment. As I said, we're waiting to see when we think that will deliver getting through that backlog. In terms of the specific recommendations, I have not formed a view, the government has not formed a view on each of the specific recommendations that have been made, but we were aware of a general concern that some information may not have been flowing to the Commission in the way that it would have liked, and we've made clear to agencies that whatever the view might have been under a previous regime, that this Royal Commission is doing important work and that we are all benefited by giving it as much of the information as it can be given to make sure we get the best outcomes in terms of recommendations for government coming out of the Royal Commission. And as I say, that proposition and working closely with the Royal Commission was absolutely accepted by our government agencies as well.
Are you suggesting there, though, that the previous government, which called this Royal Commission, obviously under pressure to do so, might have not wanted that information to have been
I have no idea what the previous government was or wasn't doing in its administration of how it might have been working with the Royal Commission. I know they didn't want to have the Royal Commission in the first place, but we wanted to make clear that there's a new sheriff in town with our agencies.
Will you permanently remove the ASL cap on the department?
That is something that we are doing to make sure that we're able to also remove the high rate of labour hire that exists within the Department of Veterans Affairs in particular. And that's caused concern not only for those people that are employed in that arrangement, which has meant that they haven't had secure employment, but it means there's a high degree of churn of staff within the department, which means as they are being trained on what is complex legislation, if they are leaving, there's been a continuous need to retrain, and that has resulted in an inefficiency in processing claims. So by being able to deal with that ASL cap, bring in the additional staff that we're talking about, convert people from labour hire into being public servants, give them some job certainty, we can retain a greater trained staff as well. Mark.
Minister, isn't the essence of this just a massive cultural failing within the ADF? I mean, the Comcare's accuses the ADF of not providing the necessary safety protocols, training and workplace health and safety information. Kate Jenkins found a callous attitude towards women particularly, but also a belief that violence is manly and experience of danger as exciting. And I guess these are the Defence Forces. But isn't the essence of this the need for a deep cultural change in Defence? And do you have any confidence that Defence is going to do that?
I think one of the things, and certainly in the few months that I've been in the role, we have seen is that there is a great degree of difficulty in assisting people transition from their lives in Defence through to civilian life, and making sure that the appropriate supports are provided to them in Defence as they transition through, and then once they rejoin civilian life and maybe needing services support through the Department of Veterans Affairs. there are, I think, multifactorial complex issues behind that. Some of those may be cultural, or they may be structures that are in place that are just not fit for purpose and haven't evolved in a way that we would expect or need to see. That's why we supported a Royal Commission, to get to the bottom of that, of what needs to happen. We now have an interim report that gives us some recommendations to get on with, which we'll be now assessing in detail and providing a formal government response to shortly. And I would expect that all the government agencies involved will obviously be part of making sure that we can get on with those recommendations, and we'll do the things that are required in order to see that happen.
So, Minister, just to follow Claire's question, Nick Caldas on the radio this morning, he spoke about his Royal Commission's very high-level investigative body not being able to get the information that it actually needed. Like, granted that you said that you're still making up your mind about the recommendations and what you do and that sort of thing, but is that of personal concern to you that this Royal Commission hasn't been able to get the information that it says it needs? And what do you think has to be done in between now and the final reports for the Royal Commission to get the information that it does need?
Obviously, if government supports the calling of and holding a Royal Commission to gather information, review it, produce recommendations to government of things that need to happen going forward. And so cooperating with that Royal Commission is vitally important, and making sure it has access to the information that it needs to do that task is vitally important. One of the things about the scope of this Royal Commission in particular is it's huge. And there are tens of thousands of people that have worked through defence over the, many times over the decades. Just since the year 2000, we've had many tens of thousands of people that have been in defence, currently in defence. We saw the census data that came out just a few months ago showing there are currently 581,000 people in Australia alive now that at some point served during their life. So the scope is huge, which also means going through records of defence, especially where not all of those records are currently digitalised, similarly with DVA, is also a time-consuming process. And for particularly senior witnesses that have had to give evidence to the Royal Commission, they have had to dedicate quite a lot of time to compiling their own evidence to the Commission. I don't doubt that it's a very significant burden on the government agencies involved as well, but we want to make sure that we can streamline those processes as much as possible so the Commission's got everything it needs going forward.
Minister, do you have confidence in the senior leadership at the DVA, including the Secretary?
Yes, I think that they are dedicated to doing the work that needs to happen, and I know, having met with the frontline staff as well at DVA around various parts of the country, they are completely dedicated to try and assist veterans as much as possible. But as we talked about before, one of the constraints has been a resourcing constraint on the department. It's why we're bringing forward the 500 additional staff for the department so they can get on with the task. The Secretary of Defence made it pretty clear, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs made it pretty clear in our own evidence to the Royal Commission that previously the department was constrained in its resourcing, and that impeded its capacity to do the work that it needed to do.
Minister, you said this report would be confronting reading. It cites a study that says of the transitioned ADF members, about a quarter feel like life is not worth living, and 8% have made a suicide plan. Obviously, you will look at this report, take on the recommendations, and there will be a final report. But for those ADF members now who are in that dire situation, what is there for them? You've mentioned the hotlines, but clearly not enough people are accessing them. Is there something more the government could do now to assist those people?
Certainly there's things in the recommendations and issues that I've been discussing with both departments is around how we can make sure that people are properly provided all of the information that is about services that are there to help them as early as possible in their service journey. The statistics that you've referred to that are in the Royal Commission report and have been referred to by many others in the past demonstrate that we do need to consider that these are human lives that we are talking about. These are real people that are living lives that where they are feeling that things are not working out the way that they should be for them. And for me, in this role, and looking at the recommendations of the Royal Commission, having that front and centre is vitally important. I've made those references to those services before. There are other services available as well, and we will continue to look at and examine how we can continue to publicise and make sure people are aware in all the various different ways in which that can occur through traditional media, through social media, through engagement on bases, through engagement as people are transitioning out of defence. We can never do enough almost to make sure that people are aware of those things, and I'm sure we can do more, and that's why these recommendations are so important. Andrew.
Minister, just on another matter related to defence though, are you concerned by the Chinese ambassador's comments yesterday around things like no compromise on Taiwan, talk of re-education of the Taiwanese people, use your imagination about the use of force on Taiwan? Is that something the government is concerned about?
I think the government's been pretty clear in its response to what has been ongoing escalation of tension across the Taiwan Strait, that we join with other countries in the region in calling for a de-escalation and a sort of reversion to normal conditions in terms of the now escalating tension that is existing there. And that's all I'll say about that for now.
Minister, just to follow up on a couple of the other questions, you said before that you believe 500 extra staff is sufficient and you have confidence in the DVA leadership. One of the recommendations says DVA must offer accurate advice as to its resourcing needs. Given that 500 staff was a promise made from opposition before you actually got to look under the hood, as it were, are you confident that the advice that you are getting is now accurate as to their needs?
It's a process that we're going through at the moment in terms of making sure we've got the most accurate model of the rate in which we're able to progress through the claims with the current staffing load, what that rate will be as we add the additional staff into the department, but also what we're seeing in terms of the continuous increase of claims being made to the department. And it's important to recognise that many of those claims are being made by people that are currently serving, which means that whilst those claims are being processed, they already have access to all of their health, dental and other support services that they have available through them, to them through defence whilst they're serving. And for people that are no longer serving, payments and medical supports for the 20 most common conditions are available to them straight off as well when they bring those claims forward. So it's not that there is no support, but we do need to get through that claims backlog as soon as possible.
Can I just clarify, following on from Mark's question about the culture in defence? I mean, the shocking thing to a lot of people is this is not about veterans alone, and it's not just about people who've been on deployment. In fact, I think the majority of people are people who've served and across all sorts of forms of abuse. That does suggest both that it's something that's, you know, a cultural problem in defence that has to be addressed and addressed urgently. In that context, can you give us your disposition to trying to meet those timeframes that the Royal Commission has set out for getting the changes in legislation, getting the changes in the backlog and all those sorts of things?
Clearly something's not working in Defence and Veterans Affairs. What's not working is quite diverse. That's why there's been a Royal Commission call to look into them. That's why we're happy to receive this report today so we can get on with addressing these recommendations, and we will provide a more formal response to all of the recommendations. So I don't yet have a disposition as to the timing and whether that is something that can be met, but certainly in the general, it is absolutely my view that as much as we can get on with these recommendations as quickly as possible is what we should be doing. Thanks very much, everybody.